So this is Chapter 10, the Union in Peril, Section 3, the birth of the Republican Party. And this has the distinction, I'm pretty sure, of being the absolute shortest section the entire year. So I know you're probably excited for that. What we're going to look at in this very, very short section is how this slavery debate, and particularly how the fallout from the whole Kansas-Nebraska debacle and the Bleeding Kansas issue and all of that stuff, eventually even has a devastating effect on political parties. And we're about to see some shifting and some moving around in the two major political parties in the country, because slavery is becoming something that political parties have to take a stand on, that becomes something, it's a big enough issue that has to be now something that they are either for or against. And we will see that some political parties are not going to be able to do that. They're not going to be able to overcome that problem, and that's going to cause them to become disrupted and fragmented and eventually even fall apart, and new parties come. So we're seeing some shifting going around here in political parties. So let's first just remind ourselves of what the two political parties were in America. And at this particular point in time, it was Democrats and Whigs. Democrats and Whigs had been the two major political parties since about 1832, since around the time of Andrew Jackson. That was where we saw that split happen within what was the Republican Party to become the Democratic Republicans and the National Republicans, which later get shortened to Democrats and Whigs. So the 1850s, as we've already mentioned, is a very, very tumultuous decade. There's a lot of things going on here that are furthering the slavery question and making slavery something that you kind of can't ignore. It's not just an issue that some people are interested in taking up. It's becoming the thing that everybody just sort of has to have an opinion about, no matter who you are. And one group that emerges in all of these questions about slavery in the West is a group that called themselves the Free Soil Party, or the Free Soilers. And the Free Soil movement is going to continue to stick around even after the Free Soil Party itself doesn't technically exist anymore, but we'll see why. The Free Soil movement, at first, the Free Soil Party first formed in 1848, which you may recognize as the same year that the Mexican War ended, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed, and all of that Mexican cession territory was added. And that's at that point where a lot of different ideas were going around and concerns were going around about that territory and whether or not slavery would be added. Free Soilers, members of the Free Soil Party or Free Soil movement, or anybody who identified themselves as a Free Soiler, what that means is they believe that slavery should not be allowed to expand west, that it should not be allowed in any new territories, that any new soil should be free soil. So they want to keep it out of the West, keep it out of new territories. They want to keep slavery from spreading. They are not attacking slavery where it already exists. And that brings up a very important distinction here, because when we hear that, it may sound like the Free Soilers are a lot like abolitionists, or almost the same thing as abolitionists, and they truly are not, because abolitionists are attacking slavery everywhere. They want to get rid of slavery everywhere where it exists. They are attacking it in the South, don't want it to exist at any point, whereas Free Soilers are not attacking slavery where it exists for various reasons. Many of them would say that it's perfectly legal and there's nothing that you can do about it in places where it already exists, but they do not want to see it spread any further. So it's more of a containment kind of a thing for the Free Soilers versus getting rid of it everywhere. And that also means that the Free Soilers, well, there can be some overlap there, and there are probably plenty of Free Soilers that saw problems with slavery morally. That's not typically their kind of number one reason why they want to keep it out of the West. They see the West as a place of opportunity for everyone, and that is that is a place for free labor, that everybody ought to have a chance to go west and make a living. They do not want to see those areas become dominated by rich and powerful slave owners. So their argument is not so much as slavery is wrong, slavery is immoral kind of a thing. It's a, hey, the rest of us don't have a shot against these rich and powerful slave owners if they go out there and start settling all these new territories and run everything. That these, poor white dirt farmers don't have much of a shot of being anything because of that. So this Free Soil movement is growing as another option, kind of another contender about what to do about slavery in the West. You have the whole allow it, don't allow it, popular sovereignty. You also have the Free Soil movement, which wants to bar it from the West. Now, again, our two major political parties at this time were Democrats and Whigs. And where we left off was the whole Bleeding Kansas issue, which showed the possible impracticality and possible, failure of popular sovereignty, and the fallout from that causes the Whig Party to fall apart. The Whig Party becomes fragmented, divided, fizzles out, and is gone by about 1855, 1856 or so, because they are unable to come to terms with all of that. All of that disruption, all of that controversy kind of created a situation where the Whig Party needed to say either we are in favor of slavery or we are not in favor of slavery, and they were just too divided on that to come to a conclusion. And so the Whig Party dissolves, fades away, and no more Whig Party. So that leaves a space for a new party to come and form in its place. And so in the place of the Whig Party, a new party develops, and that party is the Republican Party, which officially forms in 1854. And the Whig Party forms from the Free Soil Party and all of your anti-slavery Northern Whigs. So it's the Free Soil Party plus the anti-slavery wing of the old Whig Party come together and form a new national party, the Republican Party. So the Free Soil Party was a minor party, one of those kind of single issue things that kind of comes up but was not a major party. But it eventually morphs into the Republican Party. And if you're wondering, yes, this is the predecessor of the modern-day Republican Party. A bajillion things have changed, so it's not exactly comparing apples to apples or oranges to oranges, but it is the predecessor of the modern-day Republican Party. And so ever since 1854, it has been Republicans and Democrats. But here we have, for the first time, a political party that takes an official stance on slavery. Democrats are still divided about it. Some Democrats support it, some Democrats do not. But the Republican Party officially there as a party stance on slavery is free soil. They are free soil. That's their national stance. They want to keep it out of the West. There are plenty of abolitionists that are in the Republican Party, but as a party nationally, they are free soilers. Before this, taking a stance on slavery would have been political suicide for any political party. But now, one, the slavery question has become so volatile that they kind of have to. And two, with westward expansion, with the expansion of a lot more non-slave states, that becomes something that now a political party could maybe still be viable. Maybe it's not political suicide to say, hey, we're totally against slavery, or we're at least totally against it expanding, and that's not going to mean that you fall apart. And that's a pretty foreboding sign to the South. So the Republican Party, the first national, somewhat anti-slavery party, again, it is not an abolitionist party. As you can probably imagine, those Southerners and slave owners don't, make a distinction between the two. To them, a free soiler is hardly any different than an abolitionist. The election of 1856 is the first time that the Republican Party is present in a national election, in a presidential election, and that's what you can see here on this map, which my face is partially covering, is the results of this election. The red states there are the states that were won by the Republican, who was John C. Fremont, and the blue states there represent the states that were run by the Democrat, who was James Buchanan. And you can see that the blue states seem to have a whole lot more. When you look at it, it looks like the Democrats and Buchanan just swept this election. But if you counted the numbers of electoral votes, it was closer than certainly Democrats would have liked. The other thing about this election, or really the main thing, the reason why I bring up this election is this. One, if you're not aware, this is only 4 years away from the beginnings of Southern secession and the outbreak of the Civil War. So we are getting very, very close here. We're just one election away from that. And the thing about this election is that the Democrats won. Republicans didn't win, but they did very, very well. Again, just looking at that map, it looks like they didn't win all that many states, but when you add the numbers up, they got a lot of electoral votes. You notice that clearly they only won states in the North, because there's no way that Southern states would have voted for a candidate of a political party that was free soil or had any kind of anti-slavery stance. So the Republicans don't win, but they do really, really well. And when Republicans would look at this map in 1856, they would say, you know what, if we just get California, which by the way is a free state, and if we could just get Delaware and Maryland are both slave states, but look at Illinois there, Indiana, those are free states. If we could take those, we could win an election. So the Republicans see that they can win an election, that it is completely feasible for them to win a national election, to win the presidency, that is, even though they're anti-slavery. In other words, they can win an election and they don't need the South. Before this, you needed the South to win. That was one of the reasons why the slavery question was kind of put on the back burner because you didn't want to agitate the South because you needed them. You needed their votes, you needed their support, and so you didn't want to make them mad. But now the situation has changed and that they don't need them anymore. That's a pretty darn foreboding and scary thing for the South, but it's pretty good news for abolitionists. It's pretty good news for free soilers and others that are opposed to slavery. So things are really going to start heating up here after 1856 because the South kind of realizes and is becoming far more militant about preserving their political interests and their political power and their representation.